So this will be a continuation of my series, When the Money is Worth the Headache, and this will be volume 4, as the NBA's marriage to gambling is starting to affect the team building process. And good old Pat Riley has been very quietly lining himself up to be in position to obtain the services of Giannis, but the only thing that's stuck in his way is this gray area that the league has had ever since he pulled that trade off with the Charlotte Hornets for Terry Rozier. Miami in that very same trade still has a pending 2027 first round pick to send to the Hornets. And the irony is, if they still had that pick, they would actually be able to send 4 first round picks for Giannis right at this moment. Again, there's major gray areas with that trade because the NBA a year prior did an investigation on Terry Rozier and they found that he did nothing wrong. And then a year after that in 2024, the Heat traded for him. But when these teams do make these trades, they're supposed to disclose with each other anything that could prevent the player from appearing on the court. So the Miami Heat right now haven't decided should they file a grievance with the league on quote unquote material misrepresentation. That's how it's written in the contract. But again, we're going to break this down layer by layer from the legal side and how it's affecting things from the team building perspective. This would end up being crazy if Pat Riley's not able to pull the trigger and get Giannis. He's been saving up all his draft picks. He didn't go after Dame. He didn't go after KD or Bradley Beal. He's got his big fish, but this gambling shit is fucking things up for him. And what makes it worse is that Terry Rozier just pleaded not guilty. So the gray area he's already in with the NBA just being in a leave of absence, but yet his contract still counts on the books for the Miami Heat. A lot of things are in limbo. Again, we're going to break this down layer by layer. First, we're going to hear from ESPN's legal analyst, Ryan Smith, as he gives great details on the current dragged out situation with Rozier pleading not guilty.
He's already pled not guilty in this case. What happens is he went into court today. The judge had him in there, identifies him. He pleads not guilty. They confirm his bail, his bond positions, things that he has to do while he's out on bond. And this is the official tip-off of the case. So now we can get started with moving his case forward to the court system. And that's what happened today. That whole thing takes 20 to 30 minutes. But the big news is Rozier pleading not guilty. So what's next is they're going to have a status conference. The defendants in this case are all going to get together with the judge. They're going to talk about the next steps in terms of timing. When is discovery going to be provided, which is a big deal in this case because it allows the defense to see what the prosecution has on Rozier and these other defendants. And then it's about trying to figure out how the case moves forward. Now, you talk about what's at stake. There are 2 charges here. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering, and each carries a maximum of 20 years in prison if convicted. Now, that if convicted, it's not necessarily that he would see that much time, but I think the key takeaway is it is prison time in this case, and that's why what he finds out in discovery will be so important so his defense can start trying to figure out how to fight these charges.
So again, it sounds like this is getting drawn out and it's affecting Pat Riley's ability to grab his big fish in Giannis. And now we're going to hear from Tim Bontemps and Bobby Marks as they give the implications of the many gray areas that the NBA is involved with this scenario affecting the Heat current day and their ability to make transactions. Keep in mind, under the new rules, the Heat right now are in the first apron. They can't do any signing trades. They can't do no trade exceptions, and they can't take back any money in trades. And as far as the Milwaukee Bucks, they are in the second apron. So they have all the penalties that's in the first apron. They can't do any 2-for-1 deals when it comes to contracts. They can't take any cash. They're limited on how many signing trades they could do. And pretty much any money that's being traded for Giannis, it has to almost match up to the T.
I think certainly the Rozier contract in itself, which is roughly $27 million, that's an expiring contract that can be used in a trade, and that is certainly in limbo right now as far as the ability to go out and do something like that. Then there's the draft pick part of it, where Miami still owes Charlotte a top 14 protected first in 2027. It's unprotected in 2028. They're only allowed to trade 2 first-round picks right now. If you had that pick back, you would be able to trade 4.
That right there is the major key point that's holding Pat Riley back from making this trade for Giannis. Let's listen to that one more time.
Then there's the draft pick part of it, where Miami still owes Charlotte a top 14 protected first in 2027. It's unprotected in 2028. They're only allowed to trade 2 first-round picks right now. If you had that pick back, you would be able to trade 4. I think the one thing that Tim had mentioned regarding the disclosure part of it, when you're on a trade call, you have to disclose medical, insurance, contract, basically anything that would prohibit a player from being on the court. Now, there's a gray area here with this situation where the league at the time found no wrongdoing with Terry Rozier, but having been investigated before in my time in Brooklyn, the one thing the NBA does say is that it's never closed. The investigation is never closed. It is always open-ended here. So if you're Miami, you're saying, wait a minute, we should have been known that this investigation had occurred.
Now, to further elaborate on Bobby's point with that gray area, the key word right here in the contracts with these teams when they make these trades is material misrepresentation. And there are penalties if teams do violate this. Here's the exact quote from that binding agreement.
No member shall make any other material misrepresentation or fail to disclose any other material information during the trade call. If any member is found after a hearing before the commissioner to have violated subsections above, the member shall be subject to penalty. Such penalty shall be within the absolute and sole discretion of the commissioner and may include a fine not to exceed $1 million suspension of the offending employee, rescission of the assignment transaction, and/or forfeiture or transfer of the offending member's draft choices.
So according to the rule book, this trade could be rescinded or there could be penalties assessed, and it's really all up to the commissioner. This shit gets real tricky because the NBA, once again, they investigated Terry Rozier a year earlier and found no wrongdoings. So the real question is, was the Charlotte Hornets obligated to let the Miami Heat know that Terry Rozier was under investigation?
When you're on a trade call, you have to disclose medical, insurance, contract, basically anything that would prohibit a player from being on the court. Now, there's a gray area here with this situation where the league at the time found no wrongdoing with Terry Rozier, but having been investigated before in my time in Brooklyn, the one thing the NBA does say is that it's never closed. The investigation is never closed. It is always open-ended here. So if you're Miami, you're saying, wait a minute, we should have been known that this investigation had occurred.
Well, and to Bobby's point, the key parts of this for this discussion moving forward and for the Heat situation moving forward revolve around the draft pick the Heat sent out in that trade and Terry Rozier's $26 million expiring deal. Now, as Bobby said, they can only trade 2 picks in 2030 and 2032 because of the way their draft pick going to Charlotte is set up. So that does really limit them if they want to go try to make a big swing between now and the trade deadline. And part of the way they would make that big swing, at least potentially, would be is that if they include that $26 million expiring contract for Terry Rozier. Now, the fact that Terry Rozier is still on the roster and has not been waived, I think is certainly at least an indication that the Miami Heat, as we reported, believe there's a chance that they'd be able to use him in that kind of a trade. And there is a precedent for that. If you go back to a year ago, the Houston Rockets, after Kevin Porter Jr. was arrested in a totally separate matter, he was traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder a month later, and they subsequently waived him off of their roster. So there is a precedent for this kind of thing taking place, and certainly for the Heat to be able to go into the trade market over the next couple of months and have a very large expiring to go with some other big contracts on their books, that puts them in a position with the draft picks they do have to potentially go big game hunting. But the results of all of this stuff will certainly have to play out, and we'll see what it means in terms of what flexibility the Heat have between now and February 5th.
I could only imagine what Pat Riley's thinking right now. He's in prime position. Hell, he could even involve a third team, and if Rozier's contract had been good and not put on pause, he could perhaps flip that for a pick or even get his pick back. Who knows? But you got to wonder, with so much gray area and Giannis just lingering out there, if good old Pat might as well file that injunction and just test the waters with the league when the money is truly worth the headache. And with this gambling situation, in just the first few years, we've seen a head coach get involved, multiple players, and now with a team like the Miami Heat that's in a prime landing spot for a franchise-changing player like Giannis, it's just left them in limbo. But hey, we'll see how Adam Silver handles it.